Welcome to Lethal Dose, your favorite toxicology-focused podcast where we delve into true crime cases involving drugs and poisons. My name is Venus Dineko. I'm a layperson fascinated by true crime.
My name is Kayla Woods. I'm an author and toxicologist.
Let's get started.
So, today's episode is about oxygen.
Yay! Being scared of things we need, part 2.
Right.
Because the water episode was so much fun.
These are some of my favorite episodes to do.
Very cool.
Right.
Well, let's get into it, shall we?
Let's. So yes, we all know oxygen is essential for survival, and a lack of it is not good, right? So if you end up with less than 21% atmospheric oxygen, that is hypoxia, because oxygen makes up 21%. So anytime it dips below its normal amount, we freak out, which should not shock anyone after the salt episode and the water episode.
Mm-hmm.
We're very sensitive little babies. As we say, the dose makes the poison, and it is possible to overdose on this vital compound. And it is a compound and not an element. We'll be talking about O2 today, because the oxygen we breathe is diatomic and is not elemental oxygen.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
O2. Yep. Always
Cool.
2 of them. Yeah. This episode is about that. It's about oxygen. It's about too much of it. But it's also a lesson in not trusting alternative medicine simply because they claim to utilize natural remedies or they know one weird trick that doctors don't want you to know about. This episode is about that.
Yeah, because, surprise, doctors actually aren't hiding life-saving information from you.
Right.
Right. Like, they're not hiding it.
Yeah, they might be telling you that it's in your head or telling you to lose weight first.
That it's because you need to lose weight.
Right. But
it's not because they're like, oh, I'm going to hide the secret remedy from them.
Exactly. And one of the treatments that can be used by these quack practitioners in alternative medicine, which is the focus of our episode today, is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So, hyperbaric oxygen therapy is an accepted treatment by actual licensed professionals around the world for conditions like decompression sickness in divers, air embolism, severe anemia, and certain infectious diseases. So it does treat quite a bit of things.
Mm-hmm.
Famous adherents to the therapy include Michael Jackson, who installed a chamber at the Neverland Ranch after he sustained severe burns during the filming of a Pepsi commercial, and Justin Bieber, who claims that this therapy helps him with his mental health.
Okay.
The former is an approved use, while the latter is an unapproved use. I very much doubt that Justin Bieber is feeling less depressed or anxious after being in a hyperbaric. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these kinds of notorious claims that you hear from, mostly gossip sites, sure, but that are aired by these people who have a big platform, these can muddy people's understandings about how the therapy is or can be used, and then those alternative practitioners latch onto that. So let's get into a little bit of context, because I love context. So hyperbaric therapy, which is lower pressure, this was proposed in 1662 by a British physician named Nathaniel Henshaw in a publication entitled
That Often Changing the Air is a Friend to Health. Also, a discovery of a new method of doing it without removing from one place to another by means of a domicile or air chamber fitted to that purpose for better preservation of health and cure of diseases after a new method.
That is the whole title.
That is a lot.
So Henshaw believed that moving to places of lower air pressure, like the mountains, could decompress the body's internal pressure and cure diseases like rickets and scurvy. This was all completely hypothetical. But the suggestion didn't really deviate from standard recommendations for diseases like tuberculosis, which physicians encouraged fresh mountain air to treat. And that's how places like Manitou Springs, just outside of Colorado Springs, first became popularized. Springs themselves were considered beneficial, like, since the Romans. But what was
Mm-hmm.
new in Henshaw's recommendation was the manipulation of pressure to treat illness. Henshaw also suggested that an air chamber could be built so that patients could experience the effects of hyperbaric chambers in the relative comfort of their own home or on ships for use during long voyages. Now, fabricating such a chamber during this time was kind of impossible. It's the 1600s. And it's interesting because not only was it made before we could hold on to compressed air or decompressed space, but it was also made before Boyle's law was established. And chem students should recognize this as the law describing the relationship between volume and pressure. As the volume goes down, the pressure goes up. And
Okay.
he seemed to already have kind of a intuitive grasp on that.
Okay.
And this was 100 years before John Priestley discovered the diatomic oxygen that we breathe in 1774.
Oh,
Yeah, so Henshaw was ahead of his time. It was all theoretical
yeah.
and very strange, but he was ahead of his time
But
in
he
a
was
way.
ahead of the curve, yeah.
Yeah. And then in 1789, Lavoisier, and Seguin performed the first human experiments with high levels of oxygen and determined it was detrimental to human health. And that kind of set back medical investigation into the therapy for a number of years. And I do mention Lavoisier's wife, who is never mentioned, but she actually played a very important role in this research, and no one ever talks about her. So Lavoisier and Lavoisier.
Surprise.
Right. But then in 1872, they discovered oxygen toxicity, including the neurotoxic effects of pure oxygen, which are known as the Paul Burt effect, after the man who's considered the father of hyperbaric physiology. So now we're looking at increased pressure.
Okay.
The CNS effects of acute oxygen toxicity that characterize the Burt effect include headache, dizziness and disorientation, hyperventilation, hiccups, fatigue, tingling in the limbs, tunnel vision, tinnitus, and tonic-clonic seizures.
And what kind of seizures are those again?
So this is the one where the legs jerk rapidly and there's a lot of bending at the elbows, hips, and knees. So I think this is that
Okay.
that big seizure that you think of when you think
Gotcha.
of theater.
When you think of seizures, yeah.
Yeah. Now, soon after the central nervous system effects were discovered, the pulmonary effects of chronic oxygen toxicity were described, which are tickling or burning sensation when you inhale, coughing up blood, a rattling breath, and fever. And despite all of these findings, all of this kind of negative stuff surrounding oxygen therapy and pure oxygen, interest in hyperbaric oxygen therapy increased at the beginning of the 20th century because it was effective in treating divers experiencing decompression sickness during World War I. And I actually just watched a documentary about divers in Finland that discussed decompression sickness. It was called Diving into the Unknown. It was a very weird documentary. But I do want to talk about it a little bit after having seen that because I think it helps segue into talking about modern oxygen therapy.
Okay.
So decompression sickness is what we call the bends. And this occurs as a result of rapid decompression, like in scuba diving accidents. But the first cases of the bends were described in 1841 when coal miners digging below the water table were placed into a chamber of compressed air in order to keep the water out of their chamber. And so I think it's like when you put a cup in water and you press straight down and you don't let any of the air out so you can hold the air in. But I think that they were pushing air into that chamber to like keep going further or to be able to like dig underneath. I don't know what was going on, but they were basically in that cup. It was compressed, and the men in that chamber reported breathlessness, joint pain, and ear pain. And so this was the first signs of decompression sickness we ever saw. And this happens because we have different gases in our body from the intake of air. So we have oxygen, we have nitrogen, we have a bunch of stuff that exists at equilibrium when we dive down or when we're under pressure. And these gases, when we're under pressure, they exist at equilibrium with their dissolved forms when our tissues are under pressure, when our bodies are under pressure. And then when we return to ambient pressure too quickly, these dissolved forms can become air bubbles in our bloodstream. And so decompression sickness, the bends, it's basically air embolism, right? So
Okay.
the pathology is different, but the treatment is essentially the same. And I've actually seen in my time at the coroner's office, one of the medical examiners actually showed me what an air embolism looks like. And if they suspect an air embolism, they'll do like little cuts around the cadaver to look at veins that are near the skin and see if they can find the air embolism. And
Oh.
you can see it because our veins are clear. They're like straws. And so you can cut into the skin and
Oh.
open it up and you can see the air pocket.
What?
Yeah, it was crazy to see. Yeah.
Weird.
Anyhow, so decompression sickness, there's three types. There's three ways that these air bubbles can mess with you. Skin and musculoskeletal is the first, brain and spine is the second. And one of those divers in that documentary, he actually got a permanent spinal injury from decompression sickness.
Oh.
He was able to walk and all of that after, but he was never allowed to dive again. And then you can also end up with a pulmonary type of decompression sickness, which is what I think of immediately with air embolisms.
Mm-hmm.
And they can all of them can be avoided by just diving slowly and then rising slowly. And I have no experience with diving, but divers have dive tables that I looked at and I tried to interpret, and I have no idea what they were saying, but they do tell you how to avoid the bends. They also tell you don't fly within 24 hours of diving, don't drink alcohol before diving, and make sure you're well hydrated, and that should keep you fairly safe.
Okay.
But
Still scary.
still scary. And if you do come up too fast, if something happens, if there's an emergency, and you do end up with the bends and it's really severe, you can be treated with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. You can be given 100% oxygen for 24 to 48 hours. It's well tolerated for that amount of time without causing tissue damage. And decompression sickness is one of the 13 conditions for which this is an FDA-approved treatment. Doctors can do this. It's totally above board. And of course, the FDA is just a United States agency, but the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society is in agreement with the FDA for all of these listed conditions. And so this is the international society which guides adherence in many other countries. And so the FDA and this society, they agree. There's
And
only
are they like the expert on like hyperbaric stuff? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Conversely, another thing that hyperbaric oxygen therapy can be used for is low pressure sickness or high altitude sickness.
Ugh, the worst.
The worst. Have you had it?
Yeah, I had it when we went on our trip a couple of summers ago to what's the town by South Park?
Oh,
This is gonna drive me crazy.
you can look it
Hold
up.
on. Fairplay. We went to
Fairplay.
Fairplay. Fucked me up, dude.
Yeah.
Like the whole first day, like we were there, I spent on the couch, like looking at my Apple Watch and like looking at my oxygen and being like, "You're not okay. This is why I feel bad," and just like regaining strength. Like it was actually the worst.
It sucks. It sucks, and it
Yeah.
can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter. Like
I know, like we live at a pretty high altitude. I didn't think it
Right.
would be that big of a deal, but
Right.
apparently a few thousand feet more was a big enough deal.
Yeah.
What about you?
I visited Pikes Peak over this last summer, and I got altitude sickness. And like we drove up, so we didn't take the tram or anything. And I got out of the car, and I was like, "Whoa, you can feel that the air is a little thinner up
thinner.
here." Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were walking around, and I was like, "I can feel that my heart rate is increased." And I was watching my watch too.
Yeah.
And then even though it, like logically, I was like, it's just like low pressure, high altitude. I started to have a panic attack, and I was like, "We have to get off this fucking
Yep.
mountain like right now."
Yeah, that's what like I was like, I can't leave my vacation. Like I could leave my vacation or ride this out is where I was at. And so I was like, I'm gonna lay down now.
Yeah.
And watch Batman.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it made me really glad I didn't take the tram up because we were able
Yeah.
to leave, and I was able to
You were
freak out in the car a little bit.
scary.
It
It's
is
scary
scary.
and miserable.
Yeah, yeah. So neither of us probably ended up with like a really severe case of it. It doesn't sound like you did. It sounds like it was just
I don't think so. No, I felt fine the next day.
right. It's just acute mountain sickness, but it can become worse, and you can see that with people who don't acclimate properly when they do like really large mountain climbs. It can turn into high altitude cerebral edema or high altitude pulmonary edema.
Oh,
And
God.
those are HACE and HAPE. And to treat both of those, they actually have these portable hyperbaric chambers that they can bring to base camps or they can bring up with them. And then they can put you in the chamber and they can increase the pressure to bring you to a pressure.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
It's pretty
That's
cool.
cool.
Yeah. And the more interesting applications of hyperbaric oxygen therapy are possible because it increases oxygen supply to the hypoxic tissues, and this helps heal wounds even when the damaged tissues themselves have poor blood circulation.
Hmm.
Since oxygen is also critical on a cellular level, hyperbaric oxygen therapy is useful there because it suppresses apoptosis and prevents infection.
And what's apoptosis?
Apoptosis is cell death.
Okay.
Yeah.
The cell
Yeah.
popped and said.
Good way to remember
Okay.
it.
Yeah, got it.
So, these typical treatments of hyperbaric oxygen therapy by a licensed practitioner, they can last around an hour and a half to 2 hours, and they can happen 1 to 3 times daily, depending on what's being treated. So, if you have severe burns, they might be doing it for you more often to help you heal. But if you have edema or something, if you have HACE, if you have an embolism, they probably want to do it like the once. They're probably not going in there multiple times, is
Right.
my assumption. And when they do these treatments, the pressure is increased to 1.5 to 3 atmospheres. And so 1 atmosphere is the atmospheric pressure of just the sky, basically, on you when you're
Huh.
at sea level.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so Denver, for instance, is about 0.83 atmospheres. And it's not
Because we're higher up.
because we're higher up. And it's not that big of a difference, but like when people come to perform here, they very much feel the difference. Or even when they come to visit, and they're not running around, they can feel the difference in that decrease of 0.2 atmospheres.
Yeah.
As one would assume, there are many more conditions for which hyperbaric oxygen treatment is not approved. But people still try to use it because why wouldn't they? They say that it can be used for COVID, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, and this is exactly what happened at the hands of a chiropractor in Melbourne, Australia.
Ooh, let's dig in.
Yes. So Malcolm Hooper graduated as a chiropractor in 1983 and then received his master's in clinical acupuncture and a number of other postgraduate degrees. In 1995, Hooper opened a clinic on Collins Street in Melbourne called HyperMed, and he began administering hyperbaric oxygen therapy. His interest in this therapy began when his 18-month-old daughter fell into a fire. Hooper sought out alternative treatments, unsurprising for a chiropractor, I think, and discovered hyperbaric treatment. This, as I mentioned, is an approved use of the therapy, but for some reason he couldn't access it in Australia, and I'm not entirely sure why that is.
Oh.
Right. But he became like hyper focused on acquiring a machine in order to provide this therapy in his country. In 1996, he obtained one through the company Professional Divers in Western Victoria. Initially, he was only treating spinal patients with this therapy, but that is not an approved use by the FDA or the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society. And then he expanded his treatment to patients with neurological disorders like strokes, which is also not approved. He posted some 900 professional articles on the HyperMed website to support neuro recovery through chiropractic medicine and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And cerebral palsy was specifically listed on the homepage. Yeah.
No. So
Yeah.
No.
He's targeting these people 100%.
Yeah.
30 conditions were listed on the HyperMed website, which were not approved for treatment with this therapy. When the website was reviewed by experts ahead of Hooper's hearing later on, they remarked,
There are a lot of articles on the website, and particularly in the clinical research areas. In fact, so many articles that I think a layperson would find it very difficult to sift through such information. And so there are so many papers there, including, interestingly enough, some negative papers. Even for me, it was hard to go through every single paper because there is so much information there. For a layperson, I think what they would do is look at it and go, there's a lot of papers. This must be a good thing.
So here's an idea for the show. If you're old enough to drink in your region, take a drink every time we mention publication fraud. Yeah. So some of these articles included studies performed ethically on children with cerebral palsy. Like it was an actual thing that was done, it was all legit. But Hooper used it to support the treatment of adults, which is not a stretch that can be made with those specific studies. When Hooper was later pressed about this by actual experts in hyperbaric oxygen therapy, he refused to agree with their positions and said,
I prefer to rely on my 17 years' experience with dealing with many patients under the banner of cerebral palsy. I have my own observations and my own viewpoints.
Doesn't that just sound like a familiar refrain?
Yeah.
When in fact, he'd only ever had 2 adult patients with cerebral palsy.
I'm going to need you to revamp many to a couple.
2 is not many. Yeah.
No.
But then in 2007, he did meet his 3rd cerebral palsy patient. In May of 2007, Hooper met a man only called QS in the hearing conducted by the Chiropractic Board of Australia. QS was 30 years old and was born with cerebral palsy, which he was seeking alternative treatment for after his GP failed to help him improve his symptoms. He'd found the Hypermed Clinic after searching for cerebral palsy treatments and coming across a website for the Steenblock Research Institute run by Dr. David Steenblock of California, who calls himself the stroke doctor. His treatments referred patients to Mexico for umbilical cord stem cell treatment for their stroke-related conditions. These treatments are unproven, and in 2008, Steenblock was charged with gross negligence, excessive treatments, and falsely representing his credentials by the Osteopathic Medical Board of California. But after speaking with someone at SRI, the Steenblock Institute, QS continued his research into stem cell treatments and found the Australia-based Hypermed Clinic. He himself was also Australia-based, and so he was like, oh, this is perfect. He found the articles posted on their website regarding the treatment of cerebral palsy, and he called them up. Now, Hooper listened to QS's proposal about stem cell treatment, as he'd heard about with SRI, and he offered to treat QS with hyperbaric oxygen therapy and a machine called the Locomat, which is basically the robot that Ripley fights the alien in Aliens. You put the patient in it, and then it just like walks for the patient, and then it's supposed to like give you information about like how well they're like responding to the different like stride patterns. Yeah, I have no idea how this was supposed to help. But Hooper charged $220 an hour for time in the robot.
Oh, wow.
Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, on the other hand, was $140 an hour for the first 100 hours, and then you get a deal where it's just $100 an hour after that. And Hooper recommended 140 to 150 hours of hyperbaric oxygen therapy and 40 to 60 hours in the Locomat. And I said it before, but I'll say it with different numbers this time. Typical hyperbaric oxygen therapy treatments might span across 60 treatments, 2 hours tops each. So 140 hours would be a lot.
Yeah.
And cerebral palsy is not a condition for which this is approved or useful. QS did not want to use the weird Locomat robot, but he was interested in hyperbaric oxygen therapy because he thought it would help him be prepared for the stem cell treatment. At his consultation, QS was told that the only risk of hyperbaric oxygen therapy might be an earache. And then at that same session following the consultation, he received 4 hours of hyperbaric therapy and an hour in the Locomat.
Wait, so he's getting both now?
Yes.
And he's getting all that time? Why?
Yes. He
paid
$280 for this, but the whole session was $780, and he was already like very worried about how he was going to pay for the rest of the treatments because QS and his parents were all on disability pensions.
Oh.
So I guess Hooper allegedly told QS that he should fundraise since he genuinely thought that this treatment would improve the symptoms of his cerebral palsy. And so that's That's what he did. He did start a fundraiser. According to Hooper, in his testimony, QS already had set up the charity before the consultation, so I don't
So
know.
you
I
already had that idea? Okay.
kind of don't believe that,
How am
but
I going to pay for this?
right.
Oh, I guess the fundraiser that I just set up wouldn't come to my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So QS continued to receive treatment, and this was paired with MRIs, which were supposed to monitor progress, but he wasn't told what progress would look like. Like, there was no real treatment plan. Instead, Hooper told him that according to the MRI, like the first one that he took, QS had brainstem issues and he desperately needed to continue his treatment in order to prevent his cerebral palsy from developing into Parkinson's, which is
What?
not a thing. Not a
Okay.
thing that
Didn't think
happens.
so.
No.
Yeah, I didn't I didn't know of this connection, but
Yeah, nobody did until Hooper made it up.
okay.
So QS continued to receive 10 to 12 hours of hyperbaric oxygen therapy a week and 3 to 6 hours a week in the Locomat. So he's spending roughly $2,000 to $3,000 weekly.
Holy shit.
Yes. Yes. Until December, when he reached his 140 hours of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and he was just very concerned. He was like, I am in so much debt to you. How am I ever going to repay all of this medical debt that I'm in? And so he stops because he's like, I need to stop. I need to like figure out where I'm at, figure out how to pay for this. But Hooper kept calling him and encouraging him to continue treatment. And so he returns to the clinic. And by May of 2008, he'd racked up 269 hours of hyperbaric oxygen treatment therapy and 79 hours in the Locomat. Although some of the treatments which occurred after March were very graciously paid for by the Hypermed Clinic to not add to his tab.
How magnanimous of them.
Fucking right. By May, QS had paid $5,000 to Hypermed, very little of which had actually been earned through fundraising, and he still owed $44,825.
So they weren't so gracious.
No. No. Allegedly, Hooper recommended to QS that he ask his older brother to rob a bank to pay his debts.
What?
Yeah, and Hooper obviously denies this. He's like, no.
Sure.
But instead, QS tried to raise money to make his late payments by making a promotional video for Hypermed to post online that praised the Locomat treatments and claimed that his symptoms actually had improved. You will be unsurprised to learn that Hooper helped write the script for this video.
Oh, of course he did.
Yeah. So this video was placed on the website, the Hypermed website, along with other testimonials, despite the fact that it has been illegal since 2005 in Australia for a health practitioner to advertise using testimonials. And Hooper tried to get around this when he was finally caught and pinned down for it, and he maintained that the testimonials were not for advertising, but provided a forum for patients to speak about their experience and to be contacted. But there was literally no forum or chat room on Hypermed's website. So I don't know how he's...
how he was trying to skirt that.
He was forced to remove these advertisements in May of 2011 in the middle of the proceedings held by the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal that began after QS finally realized that Hooper was a complete charlatan. And QS said,
I believe that the treatment had a placebo effect upon me because it was costing so much and I was committed to getting a benefit from it for myself and others suffering from cerebral palsy. I really wanted to believe it was working. I now realize that by undertaking this costly treatment, I have found myself without any real benefits to show and am unable to pay for the treatment I have received. I feel I was given false hopes and I wish I had never done it. I am embarrassed at having trusted Dr. Huber so unquestioningly and feel betrayed by him.
Yeah, I feel bad for this guy.
That's sad.
So the proceedings of the tribunal concluded in 2013 and found that Hooper engaged in unprofessional conduct and professional misconduct, and those are both like actual charges that you could be given in Australia.
Okay.
Specifically, they determined that he failed to make a proper initial assessment of QS in 2007. He failed to obtain informed consent from QS. He failed to prepare and periodically modify a treatment plan. He failed to monitor health outcomes for QS. He misrepresented the efficacy of the treatments. He maintained an inadequate clinical file. And all of this was in violation of the Health Professions Registration Act of 2005. So as a result, he was disqualified from practicing medicine. And he was, yeah, so he is done. He's, according, in the words of the Australian news, he is struck out. And he was also forced to pay a $63,000 fine for unlawful advertising, all while he was somehow already going through a bankruptcy. I don't understand if he's taking this much money from people, how he's going bankrupt, but
he is.
But he is.
Somehow.
But none of this would stop Hooper, because hyperbaric oxygen therapy doesn't require a medical license or qualifications in order to be administered. Yeah. So
why?
I don't fucking know, man. That's why Justin Bieber has one in his house. But he would go on to treat many more people, unfortunately, including tennis star Novak Djokovic. I don't watch tennis. And players on the Essendon Football Club who were instructed to receive oxygen treatments and mysterious injections at the behest of their sports scientist. And actually, an Essendon rookie sued the Australian Football League in 2015 so that he might learn what he had been injected with during the doping scandal that kind of broke out during this time. And the sports scientists ended up getting banned from the AFL.
Oh.
But Hooper was fine. Hooper just kept on trucking. He never paid his fine, and he never removed the advertising material from his website.
What?
Yeah, he just kept
said, no, I'm not gonna do that. No, yeah. I don't think I'm gonna.
Yeah, he did very Office Space, like, I don't like to work. I'm not gonna do that anymore.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So in 2015, 42-year-old Craig Dawson walked into his clinic, which was now renamed OxyMed. And he began hyperbaric oxygen therapy from somebody who was not only not licensed to practice medicine, but Hooper didn't even have a certificate in first aid at this point.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. You'd have better luck with a rando on the street treating you.
Yeah, with like a 14-year-old babysitter who has her CPR cert.
Right. So Dawson was seeking treatment for his multiple sclerosis and for severe, life-threatening seizures, neither of which are accepted conditions for hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And they're not useful for either. Him taking this treatment was useless. It was expensive. But Dawson's dad had heard from an American doctor, because of course it was an American doctor, that it would be a novel treatment for the symptoms. And they tried treatment with different therapies over the years, and so now they were at a point where they were willing to do anything. I mean, Dawson has to use a wheelchair. He has a difficult time remembering things that happened like 15 minutes ago. He's in pretty dire straits. Despite a serious problem with a catheter during his first visit, which just sounds terrible, Dawson continued to visit OxyMed twice weekly for 4-hour hyperbaric oxygen therapy treatments for 18 months.
What?
Yeah.
Hold on. That's a lot. That's a lot of hours.
Yeah. Are you doing the math?
Yeah. 624 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, after the first 140, they're only $100 a piece, so there's that.
Stop. No, stop.
So that's bad, but then it gets worse.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Because
as things do on this show.
Because on April 6, 2016, Dawson laid down in the acrylic cylinder at OxyMed and put on his mask for treatment. The chamber was pressurized, and 100% pure medical-grade oxygen was pumped into his mouth and nose. But Hooper had modified his chambers. An exhaust diaphragm was on the wrong side in the chamber Dawson entered, and its oxygen regulator didn't provide enough airflow. It also didn't have an emergency dump valve to allow for rapid decompression within 30 seconds in case of an emergency. Dawson's mask also was found to be corroded and dirty, which may also have contributed to the failure of the machinery that day. When the chamber pressurized, the exhaust valve failed, and Dawson's mask pressed onto his face with almost 180 pounds of force, pumping pure oxygen into his lungs and inducing a heart attack and a seizure.
Oh my God.
Acute cerebral oxygen toxicity is a possible but rare side effect of regular hyperbaric oxygen therapy that can occur in 1.2 per 10,000 sessions when air breaks are included as part of the session. It can cause generalized seizures, which have been documented to be fatal in severe cases. Acute oxygen toxicity manifests with the central nervous system effects, as I described toward the top of the episode. These are the Burt effect. This effect happens in approximately 1 in every 200 sessions at pressures near 2.8 to 3 atmospheres. When oxygen toxicity is induced acutely or chronically, it can result in cell damage and death, primarily from oxygen-derived free radicals that modify endothelial function and lead to pulmonary edema, congestion, and alveolar damage. There is also the physical damage caused in this case by having the air pumped into your body, and it cannot be ignored in a truly grim case like this one. The online publication news.com.au didn't sugarcoat anything in their reporting on the incident and wrote,
"It took almost 5 minutes for the oxygen chamber to be released, while Mr. Dawson's unmoving body was inside, blood spilling from his mouth into the mask."
And this was after Hooper noticed that something was wrong, around an hour and 15 minutes after the treatment began. So we don't know how long he was actually in there for before somebody discovered him. Dawson was not the only person being treated that day. All 4 chambers at the clinic were in use, and Hooper was the only staff member monitoring them. Dawson lost consciousness during the incident and never awoke. His life support was turned off 5 days later, on April 11th. Further investigation found that members of staff were not assigned to particular chambers, which is concerning considering how the chambers had been damaged in unique ways. And also, non-standard masks were used for at least one of the chambers, and the TVs in the clinic were installed in ways that obstructed the view of the operators from the patient's point of view. Hooper and Oxymed are accused of failing to notify work cover of the incident, failing to ensure the workplace was safe, failing to complete comprehensive risk assessments of patients, failing to have attendance with first aid training, failing to ensure appropriate supervision of patients, failure to have proper communication systems, and engaging in reckless conduct that endangered others. They were found guilty of all but the last, and Oxymed was fined $550,000, and Hooper himself was fined $176,750 in August of 2021.
Good.
Court proceedings from Hooper's failure to pay his fine related to the inappropriate advertising restrained Hooper from advertising for hyperbaric oxygen therapy chambers. Hooper never removed the advertisements on his site and posted on his Facebook promoting hyperbaric oxygen therapy for various unapproved treatments, including Alzheimer's, COVID, AIDS, cancer, depression, and PTSD. His lawyer claimed that the posts were educational and were no more harmless than promoting the health benefits of peppermint tea, which is obvious bullshit. And
yeah.
And for his compliance in, quote, posting pseudoscientific articles targeted at a vulnerable audience, he was fined $3 million in December of 2021. Following this decision, the court issued an injunction on Oxymed and Hooper from advertising for hyperbaric oxygen therapy in any capacity for 7 years. As of this recording, the Oxymed website domain has expired, but there is an extant YouTube. The most recent video there is from 2023, which does tout the benefits of hyperbaric oxygen treatment.
Okay.
So he didn't stop for a while, but now he's stopped. I couldn't find him anywhere. They still have a Facebook. It was last updated in October 2023. They have a different website linked. That domain has also expired. So, if you are someone who has a condition which qualifies for hyperbaric oxygen therapy, don't hesitate to undergo treatment based on this case because it's an obvious outlier. There are risks associated with it, but if you're treated by a licensed practitioner who knows what they're doing, then they'll know how to deal with them. They'll be able to rapidly decompress the chamber, and it's unlikely you'll experience like long-term effects.
Mm-hmm.
If you do end up with chronic toxicity, that usually goes away in about 4 hours. If you're not taking breaks from increased oxygen, if you're not ventilating the CO2 produced from your own breathing, and if you're artificially increasing pressure without any sort of breaks from that pressure, you could end up with more issues. Oxygen bars, for instance, are a thing here in Colorado. I don't think they're as popular as they were a couple years ago, and they might help people who aren't used to the elevation, but prolonged exposure to pure oxygen can cause symptoms. It's not good. It doesn't get you high. No surprise that Tyler Durden was wrong there. But it can cause, acute CNS defects. And it just causes intoxication the same way huffing gets you high, which is just hypoxia. That's all that it is. It's not getting high. It's just dying a little bit. Biggest thing I think people should take away from this, though, is scrutinize alternative medicine, especially when it comes to vulnerable people who are just ready to find any solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of a medicine is a poison, and I think it's particularly important with oxygen and other things that we think of as like natural and innocuous, because it is critical. It can be used medicinally, but there's a limit to the efficacy, and especially when you're messing with pressure. Like, our bodies don't respond well to changes in their environment.
No. We are very finicky creatures.
We are. So, yeah, I'm not like totally opposed to alternative medicine. If that makes you feel better, that's fine. But like, don't let it poison you. There's a lot of
and there are predators, like, because there are some things that are alternative that can be beneficial. Mm-hmm. But he obviously was looking to make money.
Yes.
Like, he wasn't in it to help people.
Right. And
he was a grifter.
Yeah. And I can hear people already saying, like, well, doctors make a ton of money and they're not always in it to help people. And I understand that sentiment completely. Like, I understand being frustrated with, like, Western medicine and, like, all of the clinical medicine that you can get here. But it doesn't mean that the alternative stuff is the solution.
Right.
So, yeah, be careful. Be careful out there.
Stay safe. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, follow, subscribe, and review us everywhere you get your podcasts.
For more Lethal Dose content, you can find us at Lethal Dose Pod on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok.
For an overdose of content, subscribe on Patreon for exclusive episodes and much more.
The show theme is Look Far by our dear wizard friend Fogweaver. More of their music can be found on bandcamp.com.
Lethal Dose is created, researched, produced, and edited by Kayla Woods and Venus Stay safe, and remember,
the dose makes the poison.